Oh, this is beyond anything that we've seen. So we must prepare for everything. And the only way you do that is you take a cold, steely, hard look at it and get ready.
Can they be defeated without addressing that part of their organization which resides in Syria? The answer is no. That will have to be addressed on both sides of what is essentially at this point a non-existent border.
But critics say the Obama administration, in particular the president, has not explained a cohesive strategy to go after these terrorists.
He hasn't defined our objectives. I think it should be to eliminate ISIL. He hasn't tried to define how he wants to go about that. There is no evidence he's building an international coalition.
Bolton says it's critical to defeat this group as quickly as possible before they consolidate territory and, quote, become a magnet for other terrorists. Back to you guys in New York.
All right, thanks, Molly. And, you know, the optics are, you know, presidents always go, you know, vacation, and there's always that back and forth from both parties as to how this all looks. But it looked particularly interesting and, I don't know, troubling yesterday, seeing the president once again out there golfing when you had his Secretary of Defense talking about this impending doom from ISIS and how sophisticated they are, and perhaps even more sophisticated by a landslide than Al-Qaeda.
Well, and you wonder, what has the president been doing? I mean, obviously not listening to the backlash he's been getting, because this is day number 2 that he did this. Will 3 be the charm today? Just 2 days ago, when James Foley's parents are in the middle of their press conference talking about losing their son and what an amazing man he was, less than an hour later, he's out on the golf course with NBA All-Stars. So what's
8 minutes later?
Yeah, and then he does it again.
And we all understand optics, and we all understand the notion of what looks good and what looks right, but it's just more about sense and sensibility. And when the going gets tough, do the tough really go golfing here in the White House? It's such a disconnect that it's incredible.
President Bush, I was struck by something Karl Rove said yesterday. He said, you know, President Bush learned his lesson, and he felt really horrible about what had unfolded. There was an attack, I believe it was, at the time, it was an attack on Israel. And he came out and gave a press conference and then turned around and went and played golf.
But he also suspended his golf.
Well, that's my point, is that Karl Rove then said he learned his lesson, and he stopped playing golf for the rest of his presidency because he just felt like he couldn't square the two with given the current state of the world.
Well, our president is quite the sportsman, as we're seeing here, and he's compared ISIS to a JV squad. Well, they certainly have stepped it up to varsity, haven't they? But something else that has folks scratching their head this morning, Eric Holder, the Department of Justice, now saying that they're opening a criminal investigation into the murder of James Foley. And this is something that's been going on for decades. We've been acting like acts of terror is a law enforcement problem, individual problems, rather than a war on terror itself. Charles Krauthammer was on the Kelly File last night and had this to say.
When Holder says we're going to track down the people who did this, I mean, it's as if FDR were to announce the day after Pearl Harbor that we're going to track down the pilots who bombed us in Pearl Harbor. The whole idea here is to understand we made a terrible mistake for decades pre-9/11 in pursuing it as criminal offenses, as individual acts, rather than understanding that we have in ISIS an entity that is armed, has a ton of money, a ton of recruits, controls an enormous amount of territory, and has declared open war on the United States, of which the beheading of that journalist, of that American, was simply one instance.
Well, I think Charles understands that you can't indict your way out of a terror problem, something that's greater than Al-Qaeda. And General Martin Dempsey, who's head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the top general in the United States, said yesterday that ISIS has an apocalyptic end-of-days view, meaning these folks will not be stopped, that this is a fight to the death.
A Newsweek report, was startling to see that more Muslims were joining ISIS than they were joining the British Armed Services. Going through Syria, going through Turkey to get into those areas, to become radicalized and become part of this group, to fight and die. They plan when they join ISIS to never go back home. That's their goal. We're going to be martyred in the name of Allah, and we're going to fight and support radical Islam.